Today we're looking at commander cards that played out way better than we initially expected that they would.
I'm Mia, and I order too much food at restaurants.
I'm BZ. I have to eat the remaining food. This is Miso. We're the Nitpicking Nerds. All three of us are sponsored by Into the AM. If you're wondering what kind of cool shirts we have, if we're wearing a shirt that has an astronaut or a planet or is just absolutely metal, it's from Into the AM. They have amazing clothing, and they even have pants.
The ones I'm wearing right now.
We do have bottom halves, and they are dressed in Into the AM attire. If you don't even want a special design like the one Mia has, you can get a plain t-shirt, and they're super comfy.
They are super awesome, and they're so soft, too. So if you are enjoying that,
use our link in the description below for an additional 10% off. And we're also sponsored by Card Kingdom. That's the place you want to go to buy your Magic cards. You're going to buy them anyway. You have to buy them somewhere. Why not use Card Kingdom? Because we think they're of the highest quality, and we're sponsored by them. So if you use their link in our description, they see that, and they continue to sponsor us, and then we can eat food.
They also have all of our favorite picks in one special place, which has our face on it. So you should go check them out, because it would really help the channel a lot. We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
NERDS
at checkout, you could save 5% of your real money tax dollars on your entire order, which includes the 25th anniversary sleeves that are super black and silver and shiny and awesome and dual matte.
If you want us to upgrade your stinky decks or see Commander gameplay that you cannot see on this channel anywhere else, that is the place to head if you want to support our channel. And we're sponsored by Moxfield, but not yet, so let's just get into what we're talking about today. It is Overperformers, cards that we initially looked at. We had some opinion of it, and whatever the opinion is, either whether that card was good or bad, the card actually way outperforms that. So a lot of these cards we thought were bad, and they're actually good. Or some of the cards we thought were good, and they're actually crazy good. They're great.
Either way, we are very impressed with these cards, and we wanted to share that impression of them with you because you might have also misjudged them. The first card is a card from Lord of the Rings. It's Witch King of Angmar, 3 black for a 5/3 flyer. Whenever one or more creatures deal combat damage to you, each opponent sacks a creature that dealt combat damage to you this turn. The ring tempts you. If you discard a card, it gains indestructible until end of turn, and you tap it. This I thought was okay, but it actually didn't leave that much of an impression to me when I was looking at Lord of the Rings. But seeing it in action is incredibly powerful. If they're only sending one creature at you and it gets through, it gets destroyed immediately. If they're sending a bunch, it's kind of a gamble. But overall, this is a very powerful effect, and it makes sure that people don't touch you.
Yeah, if they're trying to send in 2 creatures to hit you, you could even set up things where like you kill one of them and then the other one just gets sacrificed after it hits you, or vice versa, like whatever. The thing that I missed most about this card that went over my head is it can make itself indestructible for 0 mana, which basically just means this thing has indestructible. If they ever try to destroy it, it's pretty easy to just pitch a card, save it, or if there's a board wipe or something, even from your side, if you fire off a board wipe, you go, all right, pitch a card, it's indestructible. And now this thing just stays around. So it's really hard to kill. And that ability is just annoying. That, you know, they're always going to have to be cognizant of how many things they hit you with. They're not going to be able to just chip in with a flyer if they want to keep it around. Sure, they can like hit you with a goblin to get the monarch or something, but it makes attacking way more annoying. And this thing's really hard to remove. I feel like it just blended in with all the other Lord of the Rings cards. I think there was 120 legends in that set. So this one totally blended in. Sorry, Witch King of Angmar, but you're actually pretty awesome.
This is so obnoxious in person just because not only can it like survive a board wipe because you can pitch your card, but it also is a 5/3 flyer, which is very good stats. They can't chip in with 1/1s or 2/2 little flyers that most people can usually chip in a little damage with. But if you really need to save yourself from a big attack, just like, you know, one gigantic guy coming at you, you can block with it and then, you know, make it indestructible even though it is tapped. If you really need it for that one time, it'll make sure that that damage doesn't go through and it still sticks around. That is so obnoxious and such good protection.
It's kind of what I'm looking for out of my 5-drops. It'll help stabilize you. It's not going to go disastrously for you because even if they fire off a kill spell, you can most likely save it. So this thing stays around. It prevents you from taking beats, and it's just kind of a beefy flyer. I feel like once you get to 5 power and fly, I consider you to be relatively beefy.
It's a very good card, and I was very surprised to see the impact that it had on the game in general. Someone played it, and it was really, at that point, kind of impossible to attack them because, you know, if you're sending in one thing, then, you know, that's going to definitely get destroyed. If you send in 2 things, well, it's like a 50-50. And if you send your entire team, well, you don't want to send your best thing in. So whoever had the most disposable army really could, but then that leaves them wide open to other people attacking. Overall, it just kind of changed the math of combat.
Definitely. It's a super sweet card. Highly encourage you try it in those political or combat decks, or even decks where you just want people to leave you alone. I like it way more than No Mercy. I think No Mercy's a little bit of a trap. Doesn't really do anything on board. Witch King's got other lines of text on it. So let's go to another card I didn't even know existed before I played against it a couple times. It's Teferi's Veil. 1 and a blue for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control attacks, it phases out at end of combat. This is a card that most of you probably don't even know about because I think it's only in like 6,000 decks. That might be a 0%er on EDHREC, but this card is sweet. I can send all of my creatures into the red zone or send whatever creatures I want in the red zone. And now that they're going to be tapped and they can't block anyway, I get to protect them for the entire next turn. And it's not like they get indestructible. It's like, oh, they probably won't die. It's like, they're not even here. There's nothing that can interact with them when they're phased out. So if you've got a big Voltron commander, big swings, a lot of cheap flyers, or you're the deck that is sort of demanding a board wipe from the rest of the table, now they just can't do that.
There's just such a small window of opportunity to act because it's like you get, their upkeep, their main phase 1, and then combat. It's not even their main phase 2. At the end of combat, it's gone. Mm-hmm. That is such a small window of opportunity to act overall. And just with this, especially if your deck relies on one creature, if your or your deck is very commander-centric and it can't really operate without its commander in play, this is amazing protection for it, especially if it is like swinging a lot.
Yeah, we talk about sometimes like Oubliette and Kenra's Transformation being really annoying because they take the commander off the field. This is like, well, what if my commander was only on the field for the most important times? And then for all of your turns where you want to kill it, you just can't do that because it doesn't exist. That would be pretty sick. And that's exactly what this card seems to be. The other thing, too, is if you're going to play Teferi's Veil, right, when you already have a board state, it's very cheap, 2 mana, nice, easy to play. You're going to attack with your things. As soon as that happens, Teferi's Veil triggers to phase them out. So at this point, you can't even stop the initial phase out because even if they destroy Teferi's Veil after you attack, they're still going to phase out. They still will be phased out, and they're not. The phasing back in is not tied to Teferi's Veil at all. It's just how phasing works. They'll come back. They will continue to exist on your next untap step. I think before you untap is when they phase back in. So there's not really a whole lot that could go wrong for you here.
It's so cool. If you want, you can have like 2 separate boards, the board that attacks and then phases out, and then the defender board that's kind of left behind. It'll give you just a lot of flexibility with your combat step, and it's very hard to interact with both the creatures and I guess just the Teferi's Veil overall because it's in blue, so you're going to be able to have a lot of counterspell backup if you are really dependent on effects like this.
Yeah, I think if you read this the first time, it might look like, oh, well, it's phasing out my creatures, so I'm going to have a harder time blocking. That's just not true. Everything you attack with most likely is tapped, so they weren't going to block anyway. And those are the only things that are phasing out. All of your blockers are still up. If you don't want to attack, you can leave it up to block, and it's totally unaffected. It won't phase. Teferi's Veil, nice hidden gem. Happy. Shout out to our friend Bobby Christine for letting us know about that one, almost destroying us with it.
And also shout out to Mental Misplay for the Witch King of Angmar. That game is actually on Patreon if you want to see both of those cards in action. But the next card is a card, hi Miso, that has been incredibly impactful in the games that I've played recently because of BZ. It's Dragonhawk, Fate's Tempest, 3 red for a 5/5 flyer. Whenever he enters or attacks, exile the top X of your library, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 4 or greater. You can play those cards until your next end step. At the beginning of your next end step, deals 2 damage to each opponent for each of those cards that are still exiled. This is incredibly powerful because it adds up very quickly. It doesn't really matter how many creatures are attacking, it just matters how many are 4 or greater and that Dragonhawk is entering and attacking. So if you have a big board full of like 4 power creatures because they're very like disposable or because you're able to churn them out very quickly, when Dragonhawk enters, you can get 4 or 5 cards off the top, and then that's dealing like 8, 10, 12, especially if you can give it haste all in a single turn.
There's nothing bad about this card. Every time I play it, it blows me away with how much pressure it puts on the opponents. It feels like almost the drawing cards part of this card is secondary because what has actually happened every time, and now every time I play this, Mia like rolls her eyes because I think you just hate this card now, is I just play it, exile 3 cards, you guys take 6 damage. Now I've got a 5/5 flyer in play. Maybe I even played one of the cards, got my card back out of it. You have to kill it. If you don't kill it, it attacks and does 3 or 4 more cards worth, hitting each opponent. And it's also beef stats. It's a 5/5 flyer, so it can actually chunk away at people's life totals. I've just built this Gut deck. Gut is the 2/2 that makes 4/1s when you attack, if you sacrifice things. So I had a couple of 4/1s laying around. All I did was I played Dragonhawk controlling 2 creatures with power 4 or greater. So Dragonhawk was my 3rd. ETB, I exiled 3 cards. Then I gave it haste, and I attacked. Made another 4/1 with Gut. Now I had 4. So all I did was give Dragonhawk haste, and I got to look at the top 7 cards I could play some of them if I wanted to. But at that point, I was like, nope, hit somebody for 5 and everybody takes 14 damage. And this can get way more absurd than that. I feel like those numbers were rookie numbers. This card could kill people by itself.
This is a very impactful card. And I feel like if you wanted to play like Gruul Atali, for instance, but you didn't want as like cheesy as that is because you're getting so many free spells and like you want some sort of like mono red or red-esque flicker deck, this might be the next best option because this kills people so fast.
This card is great. I feel like also don't. This card is great. Don't forget, it also doesn't even need a single other creature. You could just play this as a 5-mana 5/5 flyer that draws a card or hits each person for 2, and then when you untap with it, you get even more value out of it. Dragonhawk has been phenomenal. It might be the most overperformer on this whole list because every time, I think we've played it 6 or 7 times now, and it just blows me away.
I need a deck with that. But if you want to see our decks, you should look on moxfield.com, the best place online to build a deck. If you want to see BZ's gut deck that he was talking about, or any other decks that we have with Dragonhawk in it, you can actually go to the search bar, search in Dragonhawk, and it will show you what decks have it that we have on our profile.
Super useful feature. They have plenty of other features that we have talked about in the past. We just love Moxfield for so many reasons. Every day is a new opportunity to tell you how much we love Moxfield. But we also love our other overperformers, and the next one is a card Mia has played a lot. I don't know if I've gotten to play too much, but I think I want to because I've seen how good it's been for you. It's Reprieve. Very simple. 1 and a white instant. Return target spell to its owner's hand, and you draw a card.
This has been very, very good. It is hard to find primo interaction on the stack in white. I mean, it's not known for that. We all know that. But the fact that this is cheap, this makes people cast their spells again, especially if they are pouring a ton of mana into it, like a giant X spell or something, which means they just have to like basically pass, and they might get to do it next turn, or if they spent a lot of treasures or disposable mana on it, they just can't do it. And it also replaces itself. I think that this might have slept, like this kind of flew under the radar a little bit for a couple reasons. Maybe 1, because it was uncommon, 2, because there were so many cards in Lord of the Rings that were really, really good. And I know the CEDH community was picking up on this a little bit, but there's a lot of types of interaction that you can play within the 5 colors. This has been very good for me, and I think half the reason is because of that replacing itself effect.
Yeah, I remember being kind of meh on it at first, and I think I'm in the camp of this card is pretty good. It's not like removal in the sense that when you target a spell with Reprieve, it's not going to do something to you. It's delaying it. It's disruption. It's definitely in that sort of interaction zone, but the tempo is the biggest thing you have to gain. Like if they're trying to fire off a board wipe or something that takes a lot of mana, like you said, a big X spell, maybe just their commander, maybe it's turn 5 and they want to play their commander. It's like shutting them down for that and then breaking even yourself on cards is disastrous for that player. So you could totally screw up somebody's early game. Even if you just counter like a Cultivate on turn 3, they're going to be annoyed. It's going to be worth your time to spend that 2 mana. So I think Reprieve is very, very strong. I think if you're playing like a higher power white deck, it should probably just be in there.
Yeah, I'm playing it in an Orzhov deck right now. I was like kind of theory crafting a mono white deck and it went in immediately. And I feel like there are a lot of ritual / disposable mana-esque spells out there. There's like, everyone's making treasures left and right. There's going to be like the mana geysers of the world, and there's going to be the dark writs and stuff, and people trying to power stuff out. This is the tempo plays that BZ was talking about. Will just mess up their plan, especially if they need to spend multiple cards to get to the point where they're casting that big spell and they just can't do it again.
Yeah, they play 3 rituals, then go for an Exsanguinate, and you're like, well, what if the Exsanguinate was back in your hand? It's like, no matter what happens, that's not going to be as good of an Exsanguinate coming down the pipeline later. So Reprieve, pretty awesome. Only note, please don't ever play it in blue. It is a non-blue counter spell. It's good because it's white. If this was a blue card, nobody would care. I think that's totally fair. But the fact that we can play it in Boros, mono white, Orzhov, whatever, that's what ends up having this card be pretty good.
But the next card is a card I've also been very impressed with.
Oh man, this one's nasty.
It's Amphibian Downpour. I was sleeping on this card. Tuna blue for an enchantment with flash, and it has Storm. You enchant a creature loses all abilities, and is a blue frog creature with base power and toughness 1/1. We don't usually like the Darksteel mutation types of effects because it's not actually getting rid of the creature, it's not true removal, but the fact that is that we like this card a lot because for 3 mana, you can just have basically hit the entire board provided the conditions are right. So if you can trigger this yourself by casting a lot of cantrips and stuff and then storming into it, or if you're playing against people who do a lot of that stuff, for instance, BZ, who in the Cascade decks where you're just casting like 8 spells a turn, or if you're just like, you have a bit of interaction or instant speed stuff in your hand to help them get that counter up and then doing it, This can be awesome. I think that especially in like the, like play a land pass decks where you're just kind of waiting to see and you have a lot of that instant speed interaction up, this can really shine in there.
Yeah, so this card I think blended in with MH3, and I had noted it. I'm like, okay, this might be good. I don't know. It's hard because there's a lot of similar cards that shut off a creature. And usually if we're not getting our card back or we're not trapping a commander, it's not great value. So obviously this isn't just 2 and a blue, lock down one thing. But if it was that, it'd be pretty bad. So I was like, I'll get around to it eventually. Got around to it eventually, though. This thing plays more like a board wipe than it does like a Kenris transformation because I've never gotten less than 3. I don't think that's unreasonable at all. One opponent casts 2 spells on their turn. That just seems regular. Then you play this as the 3rd spell. You get to shut down the 3 best creatures in play. At least one of them, just based on how the game plays out most of the time, is going to be a commander. So you get the value of shutting down a commander with the extra value of shutting off the next 2 best creatures. It can totally ruin combat or an attack for somebody. The fact that this is instant speed is just like absolutely brutal. The flash is so good on it. I have it in an Enchantress deck. So the fact that it's an aura also matters a ton. When the copies are entering, they still trigger Constellation or Eerie effects. You're just getting so much value out of this card. I don't think you need to play it in Enchantress. I think it's a slam dunk. If you don't have this in your Enchantress decks, you should play it in your Enchantress decks. And even outside of it, it's felt really nasty. Like, I remember the one game we played the other day, I was holding Amphibian Downpour, and I didn't play it because I felt bad. I was like, oh man, I don't think this is the power level we're playing at right now. This would ruin everyone's deck.
It's so impactful overall. The fact that I feel like the reason that I slept on it was because of the fact that it was 2 and a blue enchanted creature. And Storm is, Storm is one of those things where it's like kind of really touchy depending on what is stapled onto the card and the price of the card. So at its face, you can't always rely on everyone else to be casting to hit those storm triggers. So I'm just like, okay, 3 mana, turn something into a 1/1 at flash speed. Well, that's kind of whatever. But then because it's so easy to get that storm counter up, the fact is it plays way better than you'd expect.
Yeah, this card is really, really good. If you have a blue deck with a lot of instants, I would already just recommend playing this. It feels like it's right on par with like Resculpt and Rapid Hybrid with how much value we're getting out of it. And obviously the ceiling is way higher than just a 1-for-1 or a 2-for-2, or a 2-for-1, sorry. It's just great. What a card. Next up, more Modern Horizons 3, but kind of 2 cards in one slot that people kind of slept on, including us. We sort of wrote them off as like, I've seen this effect a million times, but they're actually way better than most of the ones we've seen. It's Malevolent Rumble and Cash Grab. Malevolent Rumble is 1 and a green for a sorcery. Reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a permanent card from among them into your hand, put the rest into your graveyard, and critically, you also make a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn that can sacrifice for colorless. What about Cash Grab?
Cash Grab is 1 and a green for an instant. You mill 4 cards, then you could take a permanent milled that way and put it into your hand. But if you have a squirrel or return to squirrel card, you create a food token. That part's not that relevant. These are very impactful. I put these in Uro, and they have done so much work. Malevolent Rumble, I think, is more of my one of my more favorite out of this because you're getting those like ETB triggers. Because it's the creature, you're getting a little extra mana out of it. And even though it's at sorcery speed, I'm happy to make that trade. But Cash Grab is still amazing. I don't care about the squirrel part. It's the fact that it just puts so many cards in and you can hold it up.
Yeah, these are both cards that put 4 cards in your graveyard for 2 mana. I do like Malevolent Rumble better because it also spots you a mana. Most of these effects are 2 mana. The fact that we just get one back on a creature that has enters, dies, whatever stuff is wild. This card is really, really good. I think Malevolent Rumble is better than Grizzly Salvage, which is in at least 10 times more decks than Malevolent Rumble on EDH Rec. I think Cash Grab, it's not far behind. It's pretty good too. I think these are just cards that we sort of, they're commons. They're not the flashiest, but it just turns out they tweaked enough knobs on this mulch type effect that these are great.
Honestly, these shine in Uro so much because at its ceiling, you can put 5 cards in your graveyard, including the spell itself. So
you don't have to take one.
Yes, because each may put a permanent card from there. And Uro's magic number is exiling 5 cards from the graveyard. So with one spell, I can get Uro's escape trigger and just get that very easily on turn 4. That is a gigantic boost to the game and really puts you ahead of the curve.
Yeah, so it's really good for filling your graveyard, but on the flip side of that, I've got an Ishkanah deck. It really wants Delirium. These being instants and sorceries means you can put them both in the same deck. They can get Delirium by themselves, and they're still going to get you like a creature if you want, because the Delirium decks are weird. They want a lot of types, but they also tend to be like creature focused, where they want a lot of creatures for something or other. Like I have spider spawning in that deck. So we can still filter through the artifacts and enchantments, take creatures in our hands or lands to help hit our land drops. Man, Malevolent Rumble and Cash Grab, they probably just go together. They're like a dynamic duo. If you want one, you probably want the other one. They're both going to do exactly what your deck wants. The only thing, I guess if we have to list one tiny downside of all these cards, is that these are not creatures. So if you're just a creature-centric deck, maybe you don't play both of them, or maybe you don't play either of them because you want to have 50 creatures. But assuming you're okay with spreading the types out a little bit, they do exactly what you want.
The flexibility of getting a land or a creature, or any type of permanent, is what makes this really shine. Overall, I cannot say enough good things about these cards, and I think they are criminally underplayed. So if you need that, and you need to hit a certain threshold in your graveyard, you should be playing these cards. But the next card is a card that I play, and BZ has had to complain about to get it wiped off the board many times.
I learned about this one.
What is it?
It's Cordial Vampire. I thought this card was good. Obviously, it looks like it's a great card for a vampire deck. It's black for a 1/1, and whenever it or another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control. But having played against it now many times, thanks to Mia, it just annihilates me. If you don't figure out what this guy's up to really quick, you're going to die. It's so weird that it doesn't, even if I'm reading it right now, it doesn't feel like it does what it actually does. If Mia plays a removal spell and kills my thing, all of her vampires get a +1/+1 counter. I don't know if I just read this wrong, but I feel like I also kind of knew what it did, and still, it just outperformed even my highest expectations. They can just fire off, a Soul Shatter or something. Oops, +3/+3. I got a permanent overrun on my 2-mana 1/1 because I killed your things. Like, this is a must answer. It's one of the most threatening vampires I've ever seen. It's way more annoying than even Captivating Vampire, and that card is super annoying. It's a must kill, and it's only 2 mana.
That's so good. If you have a critical mass of vampires in your deck, I play this in Edgar, so it's like double the value.
Ooh.
But if you're playing this just in a place where you have a fair amount of vampires, this is super good, because this works like for anyways creatures. I think it's so annoying, the fact that it's like when your opponent's creatures die, but it also works for your creatures. So if you're sacking something to Phyrexian Tower, or you're skull clamping a 1/1, then your stuff is still going to get very, very big, because it does not matter whose stuff is dying.
And the extra annoying part for your opponents is that when you attack with all your vampires and you have a free sack outlet like a Viscera Seer, they have to now be cognizant of Cordial Vampire. The more things they leave unblocked, the more you have the ability to just go, all right, sacrifice all the things you just blocked, pump everything else, and now you die, or you take 20 and you weren't expecting that. So Cordial Vampire, you just can't let this thing sit out. It's way too good. It's like the best vampire in those decks, like, period. Get them out of here. Get them off the board.
It's so good. But the next one is a win con that I have been beating BZ with often.
So savaged by this card. Like, we're going to read the card, and then I'm going to tell you how bad it is for me.
I'm so excited.
And it's like unbelievably bad. Oh, man.
This is Radstorm. It's 3 and a blue for an instant with Storm Proliferate. Very short card from Fallout. I was so excited for this card in the beginning when I was like, ooh, attracts a poison. This is going to love it. It doesn't love it. It loves it, if you know what I mean.
This is like the best poison card, period, now. I don't think there's even a runner-up. I can't even think of anything that inflicts more poison than this card. Now, I want to be clear. I do think this card overperformed in the context of putting poison counters on your opponent. Because the value of a poison counter is 10% of the game. You're going to, very quickly, that deck will, or any infect deck wants to get everybody up to 1. And then once you start proliferating, every time you proliferate, it's 10% of the game. You are 10% closer to winning, full stop. There's no way they can really remove those counters. That's playable anyway. So this card, even if it was just 3 and a blue instant, proliferate once, that's 10%. But it has Storm, so now we're like, okay, if they cast 2 spells and then I play Radstorm, I win 30%. Like, I'm 30% closer to winning. And this happened twice now, where I play my Cascade deck, and all I'm doing is trying to, like, hit a land drop or something, and I'm going, Brainstorm, set up the top, and then I'm playing, like, Shardless Agent to go Cascade into Sakura Tribelder to get a land to shuffle away those cards I brainstormed. And then, I play, like, another 3-drop, and, I get up to the point where I cast 7 spells. And then Mia goes, end step, Radstorm. And we were already at like 4 or 5 poison both times. And I just died a little bit internally, not even in the game. I immediately died in the game. but it was so unbelievable how just dead we were.
I have taken people from 2 to 10 instantly with this card. This card is so good. And the spiciest versions of poison decks with blue in them will be able to get your poison counters very, very quickly. Whether that be, with your 1 mana, look at a card, proliferate, or it's like, the 2 mana where it's like each opponent gets a poison counter and you fight something. There are a lot of very cheap versions of just proliferate and then like kind of whatever effect. But if you can chain enough of those together, because you're probably playing Atraxa at this point with your poison, and you're just you're ramping a little bit, you're chaining some stuff, and then you can hit this on your own. You could put 4 to 5 poison counters with your own spells, especially if you're playing against people who are just like, kind of playing a spell, drawing. I feel like Enchantress decks are really good to play with this because they're always kind of just like chaining together spells, and you're just going to have like 6 spells a turn because of like things that they're doing, and then you're like, okay, end step, you're 70% dead with this card.
Yeah, it is so unreal. This card is so good that it is going to change the way I play against your Atraxa deck. It's that good by itself. I now have to be worried about
being at 3.
Am I ever going to just take 5 poison? Like, even in taking 2 poison as a surprise is really backbreaking, and it could be the difference between winning and losing. Now I have to think about what's going to happen if it's 5 or 6. So what I'm going to have to do now is bully you out of the game because I can't beat it. It's not like you can really counter a Rad Storm. That's one of the problems with Storm is it's hard to answer. So you're going to put 6 copies, and even if I counter 1, I'm probably still dead. So what I'm going to have to do now is just mindlessly attack you. And the other 2 people, if we're going to be playing against people in cons, they're going to be like, what the heck is BZ doing right now? Why is he panicking? He's at 1 poison. But you watchers, you viewers at home, you will know.
I think that if you watch the game on Patreon, if you just have played with this card in general and you're just playing against people who can actually get that storm counter up high, or if you can personally get that storm counter up high, it is so back-breaking, it's just so rough to deal with. And because, as BZ said, you can't counter it, you're probably not running Flusterstorm. You're probably running like a better removal spell, like a Mana Drain or something. But in this context, it doesn't really matter.
Doesn't help you at all. You should stop slinging spells, everyone. Don't play Mishra's Bauble. I'm still going to play Mishra's Bauble.
Talks to himself in the camera.
It's like, all right, come on, BZ. Don't put Mishra's Bauble in every deck. But I'm still gonna. All right, next up, it's a card I knew was going to be good, but it has just proven to be a staple even outside of budget. I originally thought Glimpse the Impossible was going to be more of a budget card, but it's 2 and a red for a sorcery. Exile the top 3 cards in your library. You can play them this turn. At the beginning of your next end step, if any of those cards remain exiled, you put them in your graveyard to make that many 0/1 spawns, which sacrifice 4 mana. This is another budget Jessica's Will. We originally had, I called Inspired Tinkering the budget Jessica's Will, and this is like the same type of thing where I could get some mana, or I could get some cards, or I could mix and match. So I'm happy with this. I knew it was a budget card for sure. It looks pretty good. Red doesn't have any card draw, good or bad. So we're happy to play this already. But I've played this in non-budget decks, and I'm just as happy with it. It's still sweet.
In some decks, this can be even better than Jessica's Will. I'm just saying, there's not a ton of decks that it's like that, but I play Perforos, and because they are creatures, these Scions coming down means that with an Agate Instigator out and Perforos, they're dealing 3 per person. So that is incredibly impactful, and there are always more types of those repeats effects, like the impact tremors types, or it's like, or if they die, they'll deal a certain amount. And the fact that they are just coming down, it doesn't even matter whether you're playing the cards or not, because you just pitch those away because those ETB triggers are that much more important, that I would say that I would prefer this than Jessica's Will in those type of effects if I'm trying to slam down creatures left and right.
It's funny, you were talking about Perforos. That turns this into a Dragonhawk.
Yeah, it's such a good card.
Or draw cards. Yeah, Glimpse the Impossible, very, very good. We've built, we build a lot of decks. Some of them don't make it out of Moxfield. Shout out to Moxfield. But some of them make it in paper. But no matter what, I feel like almost every red deck we've built since this card came out had this card in it. It's really, really good. And I don't think it sees quite enough love for how freaking awesome this thing is. If you were playing Tormenting Voice to filter, get it out of here. Put card draw in instead, assuming you don't need a discard.
And it's just, it refunds your mana back if you are needing or not needing to play those cards, or if you get like 3 lands off the top, you play this turn 3 and you already hit your land drop. Just turning into mana that you can use later means that those cards aren't going to waste, and I really love that about this.
Yeah, I think cards like Glimpse the Impossible and Dragonhawk, they're helping like propel Red up. Red man, red was just so
It
crappy.
was lacking.
I
Let's
think
be
red
real.
was the worst color by a million miles in Commander for a couple years there. And now they're starting to actually like give us some real juice that isn't like Jessica's Will, like $35 auto staple type thing. They're just giving us some like, budget, very affordable cards that are just kind of really good, and I'm happy about that. But our next card is Trouble in Pairs, 2 white for an enchantment. If an opponent would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. Always forget that's even there. Whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, draws their second card each turn, or casts their second spell each turn, you draw a card. Now, I think a lot of us know that this card is good right now, but also I will point out that when this card came out, a lot of people, us included, were very skeptical because how many times have we been promised a white card draw engine on an enchantment? Remember Smuggler's Share?
Yep.
Do you remember Archaeomancer's Map? Like all these white cards that just don't work out. This was one that totally worked out and ended up being great. So everybody was reserved, and now I think at least we are very high on it. This card is crazy good.
This card is really, really good, and I have been not putting it into decks because I am afraid it's going to shake up the power level too much.
Like an outlier.
Yeah, it's just one of those, I feel like we've talked about it a little bit before, where it's like one card can really overthrow the balance of your deck, and this is one of those cards that can really do that because it's that powerful. It's very easy for people to draw their second card, which means you get a card in return if they're playing like a Brainstorm, if
somebody's the Monarch.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those cards where if you are playing this and it just kind of warps the game. Someone played this against my Nekuzar-esque type deck, and it was just so much value for them because I was already making everyone draw so many cards because that's what the deck wants to do. It's like, okay, well, free cards for me too. Sure, they were getting hurt by those effects of drawing, but they were still getting like 50 cards out of it.
Oh yeah, this card has been great in our CEDH decks, which we played it in, and every power level before that. I tend not to play this anymore in the lower power jank because this feels... It's like Ristic Study adjacent. You draw so many cards, and it's not optional. So there's many scenarios where this does draw more cards than Ristic Study. Ristic Study is still a better card, but this thing is just... This is the mono-white savior we've been promised for years. It's finally here. Maybe just put a sticker over the artwork or something.
Yeah, it's the fact, it's like casting second spell each turn, that's super easy. Most people are not just playing one spell and passing anymore. And drawing their second card each turn, and it doesn't just say this, this only happens once each turn. It's just like, you could get all these triggers if people aren't reading, per person or per opponent per turn. That's very powerful. Or if they have to chain more spells on like the, on other people's turn, if they can cast 2 instants on someone else's turn and they already cast 2 spells on their turn, or, the cascades, that can really add up.
It's just a card waterfall. I love Trouble in Pairs. Pick it up if you haven't picked it up yet. But if you want to see more Overperformers, cards that overperformed for us in the past, that's still available to you. You should check it out right now, and we'll see you there.